Right. What I wanted to do today and the next time we meet is go through how to fill out the residential purchase agreement. Our office does a much longer version of this, but I'm going to give you the quick how to do it version and maybe answer some questions. Notice where I'm starting is I'm starting in the MLS. And the reason that I'm starting in the MLS is we want the MLS number. So we're going to copy that. This, by the way, will save you a lot of time. So we've copied the MLS number, and I've already opened up a screen that is for the MLS, and we're going to go to a transaction, and we're going to click on a new transaction. And it's going to ask us what do we want to do, and I'm just going to call this RPA sample. I'm going to try and spell it, S-A-M-P-L-E, and Mike Devlin. And we're going to say it's a purchase contract. We're going to leave it as residential, and we're going to look at the different templates. So there's a listing template, Mike D. Right now, in other, how about this? A buyer template, Mike Devlin. Why not? I'm going to remove some of these templates to unclutter it. And we could add a photo of the property too, which actually prints on some things, but is not necessarily a big deal. So we've assuming we're writing an offer today. That's the idea. And we're going to click on save. And all these forms, right, automatically got populated. And so there are other things, by the way, just to call to your attention. So if you're doing the RPA and you type in, by the way, RPA in the search, you're going to see that there's a residential purchase agreement financing structure worksheet and another one which is a table of contents. I'm going to pull up the table of contents just for laughs. And what the table of contents essentially does is it gives you a breakdown of what page do you find which things. By the way, just as a tip, I would recommend that you spend some time actually reading aloud the purchase contract to either yourself or if there's somebody that you don't like that you hang out with, tell them you want to practice. Because you're going to need to become very familiar with this to get somebody to fill it out. What will sometimes happen is somebody will say, that thing about arbitration and mediation, can I look at that again? And do you understand if it takes you 10 minutes to find it, right? You know, I've seen agents where they printed it out and they're like going through the pages. Nope, not here. Nope, no, not here, right? It would be, it would be good for you to be able to find the different parts of the purchase agreement rather quickly. There's also, just so we can see what the financing worksheet looks like, this is and I'm not really saying that this one is an important one, but people always ask me about it. But basically, it would give you a way of just looking at the financing, and this structure worksheet might be something valuable that you would give to people. So back to the tee up to this, I guess, which is that you're going to want to read it aloud. The people that you're going to ask to sign it are going to expect you to be able to explain it. And what I believe that means is that you should be able to pretty much explain what each paragraph means. You should at least be able to articulate some sort of a summary. This is about that sort of thing. So what happens when we launch it, and now that we're looking at this right here, we've created a new transaction. What we need to do is to fill in information. Remember we copied the MLS number? Everybody remember that? So now we're going to go to MLS Connect, and you're not going to see all of this as a drop down. Yours should just be MLS listing. I'm logged in as the broker, so it's more special. I'm pasting in, I'm going to say I want to see the property photo, and I'm going to click find. And it's going to slowly log into some database someplace, and it's going to find the information. Notice, and by the way, it oftentimes doesn't import the photo. It doesn't show up, but it was worth a shot. So we're now going to click on import. Do you want to replace the answer to this question is yes, right? Do you want to replace? I haven't put in any existing data. Now it says it's been imported successfully. Some form fields may not be filled out due to their special code. These fields may be automatically filled out by the Activate IntelliCopy feature, which I'm not too sure what that is, right? But it's the first time I ever looked at that. So we've done this. Now, my recommendation is before we start filling out the purchase contract, we're going to want to go back and look at our cover sheet. Because what the cover sheet should be telling us, and notice it doesn't have, we need to put in our buyer's name. So let's say our buyer's name is Billy Buyer, and the only other thing we really need to put in here is an email address. Right? And so the reason for that is that we need it for electronic signatures. And notice it's put in the seller's names like that, right? It's not, the import isn't perfect. If you wanted to, you could make that seller number 2, right? Which is what I would probably do. I frankly haven't seen it do that before, but we're going to clean it up a little bit. This is still better than typing everything in. We don't know, but we don't know the seller's email address most likely. So it's filled out a lot of the basic information. We don't know, one of the things which I haven't done is to go through and mark all the things that you have to fill out and all the ones you don't, right? I can pretty much tell you what they are, but there's a lot of things that you don't have to fill out. For example, the mortgage information, we'd only be doing that if we represented a seller and this was a listing and we wanted to use the CAR net sheet form. The property includes, that just imported, we really don't care about that. But when we get here to purchase price, does anybody remember what the property was listed for? $890. Let's just say we're offering $900,000, right? How about that? And now it wants to know the purchase agreement date. That's the day we're writing up the purchase contract, so we're going to mark the 17th. Closing date, we click on that, and this, by the way, is something you would have to discuss with your lender. And let's say the lender says 30 days, no problem. So we look, the 17th is a Friday. I kind of like this, that's fine. We could do the 17th. We'll go ahead and do that. The deposit amount, what's 3% of 900,000? 27,000. And if we're writing an offer and we're not putting down 3%, that means that the listing agent, first of all, in this market, you might as well, go do something else. But the other thing is that there would need to be an increased deposit to 3% of the purchase price once the contingencies have been removed. So we might, in a typical market, we'd be putting down maybe 1%, right? There's no rule then increasing it to 3% when we remove the contingencies. That just makes it look better. Offer date, notice that's a different date than the date of the contract. So the date of the contract, if I'm preparing the contract today, but I don't expect my clients to have both signed it until tomorrow, I could make it tomorrow as the offer date. Usually it's the same date. So the purchase contract gives you how many days for the seller to accept? What's the default? 3 days. We could change that, right? If we don't do anything with expired date, then it's just going to give them 3 days, right? Let's just, there are reasons why you might make it short if you've got an all cash buyer who wants to just snatch the property, they might not want to wait 3 days, but sometimes we're not going to mess with that, right? Offer acceptance date, we don't know that. Total amount financed, what's 80% of 900,000? What? No, it's more than that. All right, so let's just see. I don't really like 760. All right, so, but this would be a good thing to know. All right, so we're just gonna say 760,000 and hit tab. The amount financed, it's residential, and we don't need to worry about any of this stuff. We don't need to worry about escrow company, selling broker information. I use the different template, but really this is where our information should be. The listing broker information, I happen to pick one of our listings, just so you would get in the habit of writing offers on one of our listings. But this is in the template we should have already filled out. We're the selling broker, and we should have filled out all this information already. We don't need to worry about lender information, really. We don't need to worry about the mortgage type, title, pest control, disclosure, home warranty. We don't really need to worry about any of that stuff right now. Let's just click save and get to the fun part, which is the actual residential purchase agreement. And when you pull it up, it automatically gives you this cover sheet with some attached forms, and they've attached agency disclosure for you. Because prior to writing an offer, you need to do agency disclosure. How much in advance are you supposed to do agency disclosure to the buyer in advance of writing the offer? So what is the rule when you're supposed to make agency disclosure when you represent a buyer?
You meet with them the first time?
The civil code says when your relationship with the buyer has become more than transitory in nature. So how about this? Do you feel they're your buyer? Are you going to call them your client? When you come to the office, are you going to tell people, I've got a buyer, I got a client? All right, if the answer is yes, you're going to use words like that, you probably should have done agency disclosure. Right? But the last possible minute you can do it and not violate the law is right before you write the offer. When do most real estate agents do this? Right before they write the offer.
What about on the other side if you're selling?
If you're selling, you have to do it before the listing.
Before the listing agreement?
Right. There's no transitory rule. So you're going to Billy the buyer. We have to check the box that says buyer. We didn't fill out our information because I picked the wrong template and where it wasn't already filled out. But if we had filled out our information on the template, we would already have all of our information, including your name and all this here, your number, and this is the form that also the seller could sign too. Right, so we get the buyer to sign the form and we provide a copy of the signed form to the seller. This is the back of the agency disclosure form, which you're supposed to have read and memorized. No, but there's nothing actually to do on the back. People, this is just a copy of the civil code. And it automatically is put in the possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. So notice how it's already nicely filled out, except for ours, because we didn't do that. And then we get to and by the way, there's a purpose to the sequence in that you're supposed to be letting them know that you may be representing more than one buyer. Now, it's not that you are going to be representing more than one buyer. It's really that we could be representing more than one buyer, right? Because the broker is the agent. And the salespeople are agents of the broker, right? So first of all, you aren't supposed to represent two buyers on the same house at the same time, right? If you want to, you need to talk to Jeff or Mike Sibilia and get there. I would talk to them, right? You understand? Because it's very difficult for you know what the other offer is, right? And so if I've already written one offer and I'm writing an offer for you and I know that your offer is less than the other offer, should I tell you that your offer is less than the other offer I already wrote? Well, you'd want to know, right? Well, you get the idea. This is a really tough thing. So if you've got two offers, two buyers for the same house, what you do is you pick the strongest one and refer the other one to some other agent. But you have to explain that we might be representing more than one buyer on the same house, and they might be bidding against a buyer from one of our agents. Just saying. So now we've come to the fun part. Here's the purchase contract. Notice how much of this has already been filled out. right? A lot of this has already been filled out because we put in the MLS number. Close of escrow. Now, you might remember that we had already clicked something, didn't we? But it's not showing here. Well, it gives us a chance to change our mind. If we click on this box, notice the April 17th date that I had marked on the worksheet shows up. If I unclick the box, it goes away and it gives me an option of writing in a certain number of days. So if you do it on the worksheet, you have to still click the box in order for it to show up. Is everybody with me? Right, on the worksheet, we picked a close of escrow date, but we still have to click that appropriate box for it to show up. Otherwise, we do a certain number of days. Now, different people have different preferences, and I didn't like generally to do a number of days because too many times it would end up closing on a weekend, and then we need an addendum, and it was just a lot easier to sort of look at look at the calendar and pick a date. This is the confirmation, and I'm going to, if this were our office, it would look like this. I really should have picked IAMS. If we had filled out, if I picked the right template. But what you're going to find is that you're going to end up clicking twice. So what I'm saying here is, had I filled this information out in the template, I'll just show you what I mean. Why not just show you what I mean? Let me undo this. I'll show you what I mean. So we go to the cover sheet. There's nothing like seeing it. We go to the cover sheet and we put in all right. So we put that in. We're not going to worry about all that stuff. We're going to save it. And now we're going to go back to our purchase agreement. And then when we get to this section, notice it's automatically put our name in twice. So it's going to want to do that. So what we do is we just check both the buyer and seller and check again both the buyer and seller. Does everybody understand? If we, I've had people say, well, why can't we just get rid of the second one and uncheck it? Try it. It oftentimes doesn't work. It's just easier to let it merge our information in, right? If we're double ending it, to just click twice, and it makes the form happier. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? Kind of. So let's just see if we, in the past, maybe they've fixed it, but we could also just leave it like this. What I'm saying is that if you had a template, let me see if I can say this without mumbling so much. If you had created a template, and in the template you had the selling office information already filled out, and you're writing an offer on one of our listings, it's going to automatically put our information in as the listing office 2, right, with the other agent's name. And when you do the MLS Connect and the merge and all that, what it's going to do is it's going to put in Keller Williams Realty Silicon Valley is the listing, and Keller Williams Realty Silicon Valley is the selling. And you could delete stuff, but it's easier to just just check that second box and go on with your life. Anyhow, whatever. This is not a big deal. Finance terms, we put it in. The electronic funds transfer is the default setting. I would prefer to keep it that way, right? There's only problems that generally occur with checks and things like that. You might need to look at the listing agent. This is still happening. It was the, sometimes listing agents say they want to see a copy of the check, right? Now, the problem with that is if you're doing electric funds transfer, there is no check, right? And this is less so now because of the way the purchase agreement is written, but there are still agents that have a sheet that they give you, and one of the things it says is we want a copy of the check, right? And you could tell them there is no check. Right, and I never cared about that as a listing agent because a Xerox, a copy of a piece of paper, doesn't really mean much. I mean, when you think about it, right? What does that mean? right? We all could sign a check for $100 million, make a copy of it, and scan it and send it to somebody. I don't know, what does that mean, right? But if they argue about it, give them a copy of the check, but I would tell them to grow up and, quit being a dinosaur. You don't want to hold the check, you don't want to keep the check, you don't want to make a copy of the check with the routing number and account number and a facsimile of their signature that you could give to people. It's better not to give them a check, right? You understand? That's way better. It's because we're not doing an increased deposit, it didn't fill any of this in, but increased deposit, and you could just read this, basically it's pretty self-explanatory, but if there's an increased deposit, generally what that would mean is that we're doing less than 3%, and we're moving it to 3% when we remove contingencies. And so if the contingency removal period was 21 days, 17 days, 10 days, whatever you wrote in later for contingency removal, you would put in that number of days. Sometimes agents don't do that, but they write in something like upon removal of all contingencies. All right, they put in all so that it's not removing one or another, but either you tie it to the removal of contingencies by the similar date, or write in when you've removed your contingencies. If it's an all cash offer, you click there. Notice it says the buyer shall, within 3 days after sale, deliver such verification. The default is the verification is attached to this offer. So if you're making an all cash offer, the presumption is you can prove that you actually have the cash at that time. If you can't, it's going to be harder, but you can click on that and the default is 3 days. First loan, notice it filled in the loan amount because we put it on the cover sheet. If it's conventional, you don't need to check anything. If it's seller financing, talk to the broker first. Assumed financing, I doubt that that's going to happen. And then the interest rate is something that you're going to get from the loan agent. And usually that's the only other number that goes in here. If the loan agent says there's points, you would put them in here. Obviously, you're going to want a pre-approval letter before you write this. Some of them are written better than others. But the pre-approval letter should say loan amount, purchase price, what the interest rate is, and all of that. The pre-approval letter, by the way, should match your offer. Right, so for example, we're offering $900,000 on this one. If I had a pre-approval letter that said 1 million, would that be, could you see a disadvantage maybe in showing it? Now, depends on the market. There are some agents that are going to say, I want a counter, we can afford more. I want to let you know if you can do that. But this is a conversation you need to have with the clients. You're basically letting the seller know that they could counter you for more and that you could pay it, right? So the standard thing is that you get the pre-approval letter written for the amount of the offer. That requires some synchronization with the loan agent. So you have to talk to the loan agent and you have to get a letter. Some agents get several letters, right, for different price points. Sometimes the loan agent will put in the address of the property. That makes it look better. If I'm a listing agent and you've got one for exactly the amount of your offer with the property address, I know that the loan agent has at least been thinking a little bit more about this than a generic one. But then if you're going to use it on another property, you need to get you might get one that doesn't have the address. Does everybody understand you're going to need that? That's where that information comes from. Additional financing terms, you don't need to write in anything here, right? One of the things I like to say is just because there's a blank space doesn't mean you need to write in anything. So the next page, a lot of this is just straightforward. Verification of down payment and closing costs. Notice you should be checking the box that says verification attached. It's possible that the verification of down payment and closing costs can be handled by the loan agent's pre-approval letter. Right? A good pre-approval, should the loan agent have verified that the buyer has cash prior to offering to make an 80% loan. That's what they're supposed to do. That's a pre-approval. So one option is you can give people copies of bank statements and stocks, accounts and things like that. The other is that the loan agent can say, I've seen their bank statements. I can verify that they have the down payment. It could all be done in one document or maybe more. Any question? Yes.
If you have a pre-approval letter with the address of the property, could that be presumed that property would appraise for that? Isn't
No,
there
it's not a
something like that?
presumption that the property is going to appraise for that. Appraisal is coming up as a different contingency. It
Right.
just simply shows that rather than making a generic letter and giving it to the buyer, the loan agent had a conversation about them making an offer on this particular property at that particular price. Right? It's not really a big deal. Right? As a listing agent, I really didn't care it just is to make it look more personal. So appraisal, contingency, and removal, this agreement is or is not contingent upon a written appraisal of the property. Now, if you're going to make an offer and appraisal, in this kind of a market, you may be making an offer on the assumption that it's not going to appraise. Right? You might it's not going to appraise. And if you make it a contingency, then what may happen is the seller is going to go with somebody who doesn't have a contingent offer. By the way, whether or not you did this would depend upon how long the property's been on the market. If it's been on the market for 1 week, 10 days, 2 weeks, and there's multiple offers, coming in with an appraisal contingency is probably going to mean you're not going to buy the house. If the property's been on the market 70 days and there are no other offers, then I would leave in the appraisal contingency. If you're going to do something to the appraisal contingency, we can write a clause later so this is the conversation you should have, right? So if you say to the buyer, all right, we're offering $900,000, what if it doesn't appraise for $900,000? Do you understand that this contract assumes that if we don't make this an appraisal contingency, then if it appraises for, let's say, $875, right? Doesn't appraise for $900,000, it appraises for $875. What that means is you're going to need to throw in an additional $25,000 in addition to your down payment and closing costs. You're going to have to come up with another $25,000. How do you feel about that? Right? And if they say, we understand that's the market we're in for it, let's do it, I'd say, great. What if it's $35,000? How about $45,000? How about $55,000? Right? And what we want to do is find the spot where they say, uncle, right? No, we can't come up with more than 50. We don't want to come up with more. If we have to have more than 50,000, we don't want to buy it. So what we would do, if 50,000 is their number, then what we would do is put in a clause that says that the property has to appraise for a minimum of 850,000. Right? We're offering 9. They said they'd be willing to throw in 50. We would need that clause. Not to just check this box without a limit or without having a really serious discussion is, I think, a mistake. Right? There was a discussion in one of the team meetings about somebody that it was $70,000 was the difference between the offer price and the appraisal, and there was no limit. Right? That's scary to me, because if you just check this box, what you're essentially doing is writing a check and signing it and giving it to the seller and telling them, once the appraisal comes in, to write in the amount and take it to escrow, right? And I know the buyer needs to understand that's what they're doing, right? So it's best for the buyer not to check this box, but if they really want to buy the house, check the box. I've had clients who said, I would pay all cash if I had to. I don't care, just let's go. I want this. All right, that's fine. But do you understand that you should have a serious conversation about what what that means to remove the appraisal contingency. By the way, that doesn't necessarily mean they couldn't get out of the deal. It just means they can't get out of the deal based on the appraisal and depending on other contingencies that might be in it. Loan applications, you should be checking the box that says letter attached. If-
Sorry,
yeah.
real quick, the clause to set the limit for the appraisal, would that be just an addendum?
There's a spot here you could write it in. Not right here, but there is, see here, other terms and conditions, on that page,
Okay,
you could write it in.
okay.
Right. It's not, I've had agents ask me to write the clause for them. It's not that complicated, but if you're nervous, I'll type it up. So you should be, if you're writing an offer, you should be checking that you've got verification and you've got a pre-approval letter. Loan contingency removal. The default setting is within 21 days. There's nothing magical about that. You should have a discussion with the loan agent. You should be able to trust your loan agent. And the loan agent should tell you what the number of days when they can. What has to be done to remove the loan contingency? What actions has,
Underwriter has to.
underwriter?
And okay.
You have to have the form, the contingency removal form signed.
Right, well, and before you would do that as an agent, the underwriter, and there would have to be an appraisal, right? So, and who knows how long it's going to take for appraisals to be done and underwriters to react?
The loan agent.
The loan agent, right? So it might be possible if we were being aggressive to even have 10 days, right? What we put in here has a lot to do with how comfortable they are at, in this kind of a market, right? So 21 days is a long time. Just saying. 21 days is a long time. It take a week, you'll have the appraisal. In 10 days, you could get it appraised and underwritten. That would be something, I'm just putting in 15. We have a 30-day close, 21 days to remove the loan contingency is probably not going to make it. No loan contingency, dangerous. Basically what you're saying is that we're willing to put our deposit up as a bet that everything's going to work out, right? And sometimes people do that because they're really confident in their ability to get the loan, but that's what that means. By the way, there are some things like verification of the tax returns and getting the form back from the IRS that there can occasionally be a problem with. Even though there's no real problem, you understand that maybe there's a problem in getting the documentation. That's a dangerous thing to check.
I'm sorry to ask another question.
Sure, go ahead, no,
but
please.
Last time you said there was only 3 ways you could get your deposit, that the deposit could be handled, which sounds pretty much like, most people are gonna get their deposit back anyways, so why, I don't know how they're putting their deposit at risk.
Well, how are they
Like you were
putting,
saying
the
last
way
time.
they're putting the deposit at risk is if they have removed their contingencies, right? Because let's say if this was my listing, or when Kimberly was talking, one of her listings. I've helped agents write offers on one of her listings. And what you're going to get is every inspection and report you've ever thought of up front. You're going to be asked to sign a receipt that says you've received it and accept it. And if there's multiple offers, you know that some of the other buyers are making offers waiving the property inspection contingency. There's going to be a preliminary title report, so other offers are going to be waiving all the contingencies. Now, if you've done that, right, if you say we don't need any time to inspect the condition of the property because she's got a termite, a roof, a property, a chimney, foundation, she's got all of them, then you don't have another out, right? So if you still have a property inspection contingency and it doesn't look like you're going to get the loan, you could say, well, we saw crime statistics were too high, We drove by the neighborhood at night it was noisy and we didn't like the kind of people we saw. We've decided we don't accept the property. But if you're making an offer that's really aggressive in a multiple offer situation, and the listing agent has all the inspections and reports, you might be coming in without a inspection contingency. Now you don't have another escape route, right? And so if you say no loan contingency, I had a client once, it was like a week before escrow was supposed to close, and I was driving and I heard on KLIV that this company had just announced a bunch of layoffs where he worked. And the lender heard this too, and they re-verified his employment. We'd removed the loan contingency at this point, re-verified his employment, and he was on the list to be laid off, and they refused to fund the loan. All right, so now if you understand, if you've removed your loan contingency and you don't have any other exits, and you for some reason cannot get the loan, you lose your deposit.
Yeah, but last time you said that, the basically both parties had to sign.
Well, the deposit will
to
sit
get
in
the
escrow.
deposit back, or to sit in escrow.
That's
Or-
true, but your buyer is going to be, how long could it take your buyer to get their deposit back?
I don't have that situation, but.
Right. Well, I'm just saying that if
It's not a good situation.
it's really not a good situation. The reality is that the money is not automatically forfeited to the seller. And if the seller turns around and sells it for more money than what you offered and doesn't have any damages, the arbitrator is going to be reluctant to award the deposit. But we're talking about this could be resolved months later. And the deposit of the buyer will sit in escrow until something happens.
But you can't open another escrow.
You could open, you're not supposed to open another escrow. I don't want to necessarily get into that. I have to admit, I have opened more than one escrow on a listing. Right, but you're gambling with that, because if for some reason that buyer's lawyer could make a claim that they're still in contract for some reason you didn't do something, then you've got problems, right? The way the contract is written, it says that if the buyer defaults without cause, the buyer loses their deposit. That's what it says, right? That's what the contract says. And I know that there's some practical problems with that, but you don't want to risk, well, we can get your deposit back eventually anyhow, don't worry about it. Let's just click the box and go forward. That's dangerous, right? Because it may be 6 months later, and their $27,000 is still sitting in an escrow, and they can't buy another house because that was the money they needed, and their interest rates have gone up, and they're very unhappy with you, right? So lender limits on buyers' credits. This is something that you would need to discuss with the loan agent. Are there limits on the allowable credit that the seller might give? We're not getting a lot of credits from the seller, but buyer stated financing basically says that the buyer it says that the buyer is required to try to get the loan that they mentioned in this contract. But that if it sort of by implication says they could get another loan, as long as they close on time and it doesn't require the seller to do anything. That's sort of what that paragraph says. Seller, and by the way, seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified. Seller has agreed in reliance on buyer's covenant concerning financing. One of the people that I was coaching recently, the seller, the buyer makes an all-cash offer. All cash, no loan. Then the buyer asks for an appraisal. Well, that's not the same contingency, right? Even if I'm an investor, I could get an appraisal. Then it became obvious that the buyer was getting a loan and wanted to delay close of escrow because they were taking too long in getting their loan together. So first of all, is it legal for a buyer to say all cash, then to go get a loan? They had proof that they could buy it, right? They had proof that they could buy it. It's legal for them to do that, but they ended up having to pay a premium in order to get it because they weren't closing on time. And they weren't closing on time because they were getting a loan, and it said in the contract that they didn't need a loan. They weren't going to get a loan. So this says that the seller is relying on whatever the buyer says. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement. Seller has no obligation to cooperate if the buyer chooses something else. But the reality is that if you did something different and you closed on time, no harm, no foul, right? Sale of property, if you're checked this box, one of the new things is it'll do, notice how when I checked the box, it added the form. I don't necessarily need to see this, I'll let it go. So once we check a box, the COP form automatically loads. That means that the buyer has to sell the property, right? I'm going to uncheck it just for fun. There really isn't a lot here that you need to do. If it's a backup offer, you would check that. We don't do very many short sales. Court confirmation is for probates and other things that require court confirmation. A probate advisory is an advisory. That would be in addition to checking that box. That's where if you had added an addendum. The statewide buyer and seller advisory is something that oftentimes the seller is going to already give you, the listing agent's already going to give you. If not, you might want to check it. If it's not part of the disclosures, you want that in. Other terms, this is where we could write in property must appraise for a minimum of $850. Right? If that was the amount. Allocation of costs. If the seller has already given you a natural hazard zone disclosure, you don't need to check anything. If they have not, I would check seller shall pay. I would include environmental, and I would just write in prepared by seller's choice. Right? If they've already given you the natural hazard disclosure, then don't check anything. You've already got it. Other reports, you don't need to list the reports the buyer is going to get, right? So if the buyer is going to get a property inspection, you don't need to check the box, type in property inspection, and write out the name. There's another clause that says the buyer can do whatever they want for inspections. Government, is everybody with me? So are we going all right?
Good question.
Right.
So regarding, in the scenario where all the disclosures are upfront and you still have a property inspection contingency, that's just for new stuff, whatever the buyer wants to inspect.
Right. The property inspection contingency only covers things that the buyer did not know when they wrote the offer. This is why I always wanted as a listing agent to get everything and get it to the buyer before the buyer wrote the offer, because they can't then say, oh, well, there's $10,000 worth of termite work. I decided not to buy the house. Well, you knew that when you made the offer. Mm-hmm. You have to be more creative. Mm-hmm. But if it's a multiple offer situation and the listing agent has all the inspections, you might be making the offer without that contingency.
Mm-hmm. And thanks for confirming. And another question regarding appraisal versus loan contingency. So what would need to happen for the loan to be approved while the house doesn't appraise and the person can come up with?
Appraisal, the loan contingency and appraisal are really looking at two different things. The lender is going to be making an 80% loan based upon the appraisal. As long as the buyer has the difference in cash, the lender doesn't care. In fact,
but
yeah.
But in a situation where, so say there's no appraisal contingency, just the loan contingency, and the buyer has the funds to make up the difference, but doesn't want to. Is there anything in the contract?
No, there's no, unless you put this clause in here, there's nothing that allows them an out because they don't want to. If you do not have an appraisal contingency and the buyer has the available cash, what a listing agent's going to say is, show me the rejection letter from the underwriter.
Right, so the underwriter would kind of make the buyer use the funds that they have. The buyer can't say to the underwriter, I don't want to use those funds.
Well, it's not really when you.
What would constitute the lender to say no?
The loan contingency and the appraisal contingency are two different contingencies. If you don't have an appraisal contingency, you're representing you have the money to make up the difference no matter what. There's another part of the contract that says that the balance of the down payment, it's here someplace, is not a contingency of this agreement. I'll have to find it. But basically, if you're saying you have that money, if the lender is looking at the credit of the buyer and verification of tax returns and ratios and things like that. So if the lender is willing to make that loan and you don't have an appraisal contingency, you're obligating yourself to come up with the difference, or you could lose your deposit. If you can't come up with the difference, you need to put in a clause that says it must appraise for a minimum of this, right? If you take that out, you could be risking your deposit disappearing.
Okay, so the lender will not, if the buyer.
The lender's not going to write, we've rejected you as a borrower because it didn't appraise. Right, you understand? That's a
But
different.
then appraise, and if the buyer doesn't have.
But then the buyer should have had an appraisal contingency.
Okay, but the lender's not going to write rejected just from.
The lender's going to say, you've been approved for your 80% loan of this amount, congratulations. And then you're going to say, well, I don't have enough cash to close. You're having the cash to close is not a contingency.
Okay.
Right? So if appraisal can be in the contingency, which puts a cap on it. But that's why I think it's very dangerous to just remove the appraisal contingency without having some sort of a floor as to how low it can go, or ceiling as to how much money they have to put in.
Okay, I was just curious how the lender works in terms of.
Yeah, the lender's going to say, well, it didn't appraise, but that's not the. So look at this. Buyer's contractual obligations regarding deposit, balance of down payment, and closing talks are not contingencies of this agreement. You see that? So I don't have enough money to close is not a way to get out of the contract.
I've got a case like that right now. I don't know what the heck to do.
Well, sometimes they need to ask all their friends. If they have any family.
Give them 2 month, additional time to get it together, and we're down to the wire again. And
They
I
don't have
think
the
he's-
money.
I don't think
I've heard of this before. They need
I don't know
to, the loan, this is a sometimes people spend the money between when they make the offer and, they go out and buy stuff. There's actually this, what you need to do is you get like this big plastic jar, and you take their credit cards and you drop them in and you fill it up with water, and then you freeze it, and you tell them that they'll get it back and they can thaw it out once they bought the house. But if you look at that buyer, you understand having the money to close is not a contingency. You verified that you have the money in closing costs up here, right? So at this point, you've warranted that you have the money to close. It's not a contingency. If appraisal is not a contingency, if you don't have the money, you've breached the contract, you could lose your deposit. All right, so under inspections, you understand, we're not going to write in every inspection we want to do. We're only going to mark the ones we want the seller to pay for that they haven't already done. Is that clear, right? We don't write in all the ones we want to do. We're just going to mark the ones we want the seller to pay for if they haven't already done it. It's irritating sometimes the listing agents if you say, I want the seller to pay for a natural hazard disclosure, and you already gave them a copy of one and they signed the cover and gave it back to you. It's like, well, are you asking me to buy another one? Right?
So you would check nothing.
Well, if they've already got it, then
You
you
would check
don't,
nothing.
then you just don't do anything. If they haven't got it, I would want an environmental incorporated. By the way, as a listing agent, I know that a lot of our top agents do this too. The NHD has everything. They order the full, complete, everything package, because the last thing you want as a listing agent is to be renegotiating the price in the middle of escrow. All right, government retrofit. In a typical market, you would click on the seller should pay, and the seller should pay, and the seller should pay. Right? Doesn't have to be. You could unclick them. This is not a big deal. We don't really have. Basically, the first one says buyer or seller shall pay for smoke alarm and carbon monoxide and water heater and bracing. That's what it says. right? If they don't already have it, basically the law says when escrow closes, the water heater has to be braked, there has to be carbon monoxide and smoke alarms. Is it possible for the buyer to pay for that? Yes, right? Typically, it's something the seller would do. This is not, we're not talking about a lot of money here, right? One way or the other. Buyer and seller, the cost of compliance with other minimum mandatory, if you could click buyer or seller, but we don't really have very many, I can't think of one that applies in Santa Clara County. Retrofit, I can't think of any that applies in Santa Clara County yet. Santa Cruz County has low flow toilet and shower and other kinds of retrofits. Some counties have minimum standards for insulation. But this is, in a typical market, we'd be checking those boxes that way. Escrow and title, if the listing agent is good, you should already know who the escrow and title is with. If you do not, you would normally click seller shall pay the escrow fee. If you don't know who the seller wants, this is Santa Clara County, pick seller's choice. The general rule is that whoever pays gets to pick, right? So if you don't know that it's open with Chicago title, say seller shall pay, seller's choice. If it's outside of California, there's a website, I'm not outside of California. If it's outside of Santa Clara County, there's a website called Chicago Title Transfer Tax, right? It's called Chicago Title Transfer Tax.com, and I'm sure that other title companies have it. I just don't know right off the top of my head what it is. But what this does is it gives you a breakdown for every county in California. It tells you, is it a seller pay? Is it most of them are seller pays, but around here there's some buyer pay counties. So it tells you whether or not there's a city transfer tax. And so when we get to allocation of costs, you ought to not ask for the seller to pay for fees that do not exist, right, in that particular county. It just, listing agents will just sigh when they see that, So I'm just doing Santa Clara County. You could look up the other one. Typically, the seller pays for the county transfer. Buyer and seller would split 50-50. The city transfer tax. So we're talking about San Jose. Not every city in San Jose has a transfer tax, right? You would look here, like if we go to Santa Clara County, and it shows that the city tax is in Mountain View, Palo Alto, and San Jose, and it tells you what it is. It's split 50-50, so it's $3.30 total. That's $1.65 per thousand for each party, right? Homeowner associations, you could typically, if it was in a homeowner association, the seller would pay the transfer fee and pay for the documents. Private transfer fees, you could see them on a prelim. Whoever wants to pay for them, you don't see them very often. The fact that there's a 7-8 of things for you to write in doesn't mean you have to. Either the buyer or seller could pay for a home warranty. If I were the listing agent, I would probably have a home warranty on the property already as part of during the listing period. So if something breaks during the listing period, the property is covered by the home warranty. I think that's a really good thing to do. And I would already have given you the information of the home warranty policy. I would explain to the seller that you want to have a home warranty and you want to pay for it. And one of the things that I used to explain to them was that our errors and omissions insurance changes based upon home warranty issuance. And I would ask them, why do you think that is? Why do you think the companies that insure us against legal liability give us a better deal if most of our transactions involve a home warranty. And people say, well, because you get sued less. And if you were a seller, would you want to lower your opportunity for being sued after escrow closes? Right? Right? What would a seller end up paying for defects and things like that? 150,000, right? You understand? It could be a lot of money. So I'd say we're talking about $400. But if I'm writing this, I might ask the seller to do it. Again, if we're talking about 900,000, what's $400? You might have your favorite home warranty company. You could put it in, even if the buyer is going to pay for it. You might want to write it in, and you ought to spend some time with a home warranty rep and have them explain to you what the different coverages are, because they might want to upgrade. They might want to add some things to it. Notice there's actually a box that says buyer waives the purchase of a home warranty plan. Notice the buyer has to, if the buyer doesn't want one, they have to click that box. Notice these other ones have gone away. And the reason they put that in is that the chances that you as an agent and we as an office are going to get sued have just gone up if there's no home warranty. Right? So whoever pays for it, I don't really care. If you're going to ask the seller to pay, you could say seller's choice, right? Or if you have your favorite home warranty company, write in Old Republic Home Warranty, Fidelity National Home Warranty, or whatever you like. Right? I'm just saying it would be better to have one than not. Items covered and excluded. Let me just finish this. Yeah, question.
Yeah, question going back a few lines. What are some of the examples of private transfer fees?
Some subdivisions, when they put in, created a private transfer fee in order to raise funds in the future. So what they've done is they every time somebody transfers the property, there's a fee that has to be paid to somebody else. Right.
Okay.
And this is not common, but it should show up in the prelim. Right. And at least it doesn't, the seller doesn't have to pay for it, but you should at least, have a discussion. Items included in the sale. Notice the buyer and seller. Items listed as included or excluded in MLS flyers or marketing materials are not included in the purchase price or excluded unless specified in paragraph 8, B, or C. Does everybody see that? I used to have agents that would bring a copy of the MLS printout, right, and say, look at this. We get the whatever. And what does this paragraph say? What the MLS says is not important, right? You understand that the listing agreement is between the listing office and the seller, and the MLS is simply a distribution of information. It does not create a binding contract between the buyer and the seller, right? It's not incorporated into that.
I have a question about
Yeah.
that. On my last transaction, in the MLS, it said that the house had Hunter Douglas shutters,
Mm-hmm.
and when the buyer made an offer on it, they couldn't find anywhere on the shutters that it actually said Hunter Douglas.
Right.
They made a big stink about it, like negotiated the price, and then it was just a big to-do. So where is, as the listing agent, where is my negotiating power with that? Or
Well,
what could have been done?
first of all, there's two issues here. What it says in the MLS is doesn't necessarily control in the contract. However, there's a section, I believe it's 1848 of the California Civil Code, that essentially says that real estate agents can be held liable for what they put into the multiple listing service.
Okay.
And what I would take away from that is that you should not put in Hunter Douglas shutters unless you could prove they are Hunter Douglas
Don't just
shutters.
go by what the owner says.
Just don't go by what the owner says. Do they have a receipt
Right.
when they bought it? What do they have to prove that this is Hunter? And I would say to people, I believe you, right? But these buyers, suspicious, untrusting people, and can we prove that? And if you can't prove it, I wouldn't put it in the flyer,
Okay.
right? The idea that just because it's not incorporated into the purchase contract doesn't mean they could sue you for lying to them, or even, you're not supposed to put stuff in that you can't verify,
Okay.
right? But, so I just would have left off the Hunter Douglas.
Yeah.
And on the same note, so if MLS says double pane windows, and it turns out that only some of the windows are like that, so what
So
is,
that, if it says double pane windows and only some of them, they didn't say all windows double pane.
so does that mean that?
That means,
the
are there,
listing agent is-
if you put down that there's carpets, does that mean there has to be carpets in every room?
No, but
N-
I guess
no.
my when I read something like double pane windows, to me, it mean, again,
Well, if they had two of them
yeah, that could-
that were double paned, then it's accurate to say double pane windows.
sure, but as the buyer, I would feel deceived.
Well, that's why if you have, so property inspectors oftentimes look at the windows and identify that there are or are not. But you just have to be careful. The fact that it says double pane windows, I would make sure the buyer understands that it doesn't mean every window is double paned.
Okay.
Right. I sold a property in downtown Campbell on Civic Center, and they had it said triple pane windows. Right. This is right next to the light rail station. You could throw stuff and hit the, not at the station, but as the light rail went by, but only on that side. And the other windows weren't even double pane. And so the buyer wanted triple pane windows everywhere. Well, that's,
Okay.
they lost the argument.
Okay.
Right, because there were on the side where it was noisy.
Mhm.
So you just can't assume that because you learn this over time, it's sometimes nonfiction. Is that anyhow, what real estate agents put in the flyers are not necessarily inclusive. Tile floor doesn't mean that all the things that look like tile are tile. It means that someplace there's a tile floor,
Okay.
right? But not everywhere that looks like a tile is really tile.
Okay.
They've improved this over the years. Note to buyer and seller items list. I've already did that. All existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property, existing electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating, ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs and grates, solar power systems, built-in appliances, window and door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings, attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dishes, air coolers, conditioners, pools, spa equipment, garage door openers and remote controls, mailbox, in-ground landscaping, tree shrubs, water features and fountains, water softeners, water purifiers, security alarms, and the following if checked. Now, in-ground landscaping. So I sold a house, and in the backyard, they had these rather large, really large, concrete planters. Big round planters made out of concrete with large tree-like objects, sort of shrubs growing from them. And so I represented the buyer, and we moved in, and they were gone. And I think it would have taken a forklift to move them, but in-ground landscaping, right? Though, and I remember thinking, gotcha, right? In-ground. So any large, even heavy planters, right? And I got to the point where I would start to write stuff down, right? Because I ended up buying do you know what the cost of there was a concrete, like a bench in the backyard, right? Which was there and then wasn't there, and not,
Big rocks, like the landscaping rocks.
well, they, not landscaping rocks, but this was a big planter, and it's not included because it's not in ground. And how about a bench in the backyard? Right, like a little park bench thing for people to sit on to watch the rabbits and things like that. It was gone, right? It was it was a concrete bench. And I said, I'll get you one, and it was like $500. There was like $500. They were like really expensive. So I got better at saying, what about that, right? So you point to it and you say, do you want this? You want the bench? Because you look at this list. See that, a bench in the backyard, is that included? Is that on the list? It's not on the list, right? Not on the list.
So then to your point, those
Yeah.
decorative rocks, is that,
Well, a decorative rock is, if it's part of the landscaping and it's on the ground, if it's in the ground.
it's on the
It-
ground, is that?
On the ground, well, you could say the sod is on the ground, I guess, but there's a certain point. I started to just say, list things just to be safe. I sold a condominium in Willow Glen, a townhouse, and on the wall was a candelabra. I mean, it stood on the ground, stood on the floor. It went up, wood with things that stuck out, candles on them, and it was actually bolted. There was like a little hook thing that held it to the wall, so it wouldn't fall over with the candles. So I represented the seller, property closed, buyer moves in, it's gone. It's gone. And so the buyer wanted the candelabra back. And I said, it's gone. Is that included? Now, my argument was no, not included. And, not included. I don't see. The agent tried to claim that the candles constituted a lighting fixture, right? That was the argument he tried to make, that it was a lighting fixture, and my argument was it's a decoration. It's decorative. If it's decorative, it's personal property, right? If it had been a Monet original painting, would you have expected, even if it had been bolted to the wall, would you have expected to get it? Probably not, right? So it was, but you understand how after I think that guy bought a candelabra for his clients. You understand, if you do this a few times and you start to write down everything, right? You walk around and anything that isn't on this list, all right, and I read the list fast, but anything that's not on this list that's questionable, point at it and ask the buyer, do you want that? And if they say yes, write it down. Integrated phone, home automations, leased or liened items. What would be an example of something that's leased or liened? Solar is the big one. All right. And just because they have it doesn't mean they own it. All right. They might be leasing it, or there might be a loan against it. Items excluded from sale, that would be what you would write in if the seller said, if you don't get you don't get the Tiffany lamp and the Tiffany chandelier, you could write it in just to make it easy. Any questions on, this is, by the way, one of the areas that causes the most fun. All right. I used to make this comment that if you stood outside of Home Depot and you watch people carrying out, like chandeliers and fireplace inserts and things like that. See, there's a fireplace, why don't we just talk about this? Fireplace, anyhow, and you ask them what they did for a living. See, fireplace inserts is now on the list, right? Does everybody see that? What about the screen that goes in front of the fireplace? Is that on the list? Yeah, I don't see it on the list. How about those little tools, right? The little tools that they give you a little brush and a little shovel, all that. Is that that's not on the list either. If you stood outside of Home Depot and you look for people coming out with chandeliers, fireplace screens, and those little fireplace tool kits, and you stop them and ask them what they did for a living, you would find real estate agent came up more often than their percentages of population, right? Do you understand? Because the buyer moved in and the fireplace screen is gone. The only reason I bought this house is because of the fireplace screen.
That's the lighting.
What?
Chandelier, I'm just curious.
Chandeliers,
Is that the lighting?
what they do though is they take it down and they take their Tiffany one down and they put up a cheap one and they take it with them. And in bedrooms, I've had people remove mirrors from the wall. Great big mirrors that the wife had put up special. They took it down and took it with them.
What is a wood burning stove? Is that a built-in appliance?
And see, you'd need to write it down. right, is a built-in, you're talking about the
It's got a
little.
pipe, so
It's
it's
got a
built in.
pipe, well, but you understand that, supposing it's gone and they plug the hole, the idea is, how would you get it back? Small claims court. Right? Does this sound like something that, you're gonna end up buying somebody a wood stove, right? Right, so that's why clarity is power, as they say someplace, I've heard that, This is something you really wanna go through with them.
Sorry, quick question.
Sure.
So when somebody changes the chandelier or changes the fancy shower head to a non-fancy one, so the buyer, it's in the contract that, okay, where is it in the contract that says? That
It says existing, and the existing here, notice they've now capitalized the word existing.
Okay, so
Because
as a
they're
buyer-
not supposed to change it, but people still sometimes do that. What I always would do with the seller is, I would ask them, is the chandelier, no, we're gonna keep it. Rather than even putting up a sign that says this is not included. Because even if you do that, the buyer's gonna say, I want it. Is to take it down now, go down to Home Depot now, buy your alternative, replace it, put that in a box where no one can see it. Right? All right, let's stop here. Next week